teaching elementary general music history.
So we should point out that we're both elementary general teachers, so K through 5.
K through 4.
K through 4 for you.
So my question being, I'm not sure about your school's curriculum. With my school's curriculum, one of the units is, culture, history, all that stuff. That kind of discussion being what got me into music, learning that like around jazz there was a culture. It wasn't just the recordings. So obviously that being such an important part of music, you go into an elementary classroom, you're like, how can I kind of start to convey that to get the kids interested, other than you learn the songs, you learn your basic skills. You learn some stuff that we didn't learn when we were in elementary school because we're good like that. And so the question being, how can I kind of take what is easily a drier subject, history, like if you don't teach that the right way, very dry.
Oh yeah, I mean,
I'm not knocking history. I think history is interesting. That's just the way it is.
Well, and again, we're talking for the grade level. If you have any suggestions, in fact, we actually we posted a couple things saying, hey, what do you do? Because that's something that I could definitely use some help with.
Yeah.
But if you have any suggestions, please explain in the comments or our Facebook page.
Yeah. How do you make it interesting for the grade level, for their level ability to understand it? How can you make it hands-on?
Yeah.
So
hands-on. Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, you go from. I find my issue is in my classroom it's a lot of movement.
Right.
I mean, it's a lot of songs. I mean, especially if we're talking. Let's take kindergarten, first grade, for instance. We always do a skill building exercise, whether that be Kadai and the Kerwin hand signs and singing solfege. Usually some sort of Kadai rhythm reading. And I do that every day because I find that's so crucially important. Because I remember, when I went through elementary school, that it was like one unit of like, okay, we're going to talk about notes. I'm not going to retain any of that.
Right.
It's actually, I mean, the most refreshing thing is students that when I come back in September over the summer, I can give a kid a rhythm and they can read it. Like they actually retain it if you give it to them every day. But then I feel like I have to do that, not necessarily at the cost. Well, but I mean, time is limited. So I have to do it at the cost of having, these really interesting hands-on history lessons.
Right.
So, I mean, how do you balance it?
Yeah. The interesting thing, I kind of went online for this one and tried to ask people, what do you do in your classroom? Do you have any tips? Interestingly enough, teachers are not good at reading directions frequently.
Well, I think that's the internet in general when you pose a question.
Yeah, so unfortunately, a lot of the feedback I got kind of leaned towards teaching middle school, which was not what I asked. In terms
and middle school is a lot easier. I mean, that tends to be the curriculum. I mean,
that age, middle school, because I used to teach the middle school level, they're able to independently do work and independently have thoughts independent of what you're saying.
I mean, you can teach it like an American history course and just have it be about music and be fine with the way the curriculum works. It does not work for.
So like the number one thing that people were saying is like, oh, have them do a research project, and then some people threw in, we have one-to-one technology resources, so they could do a research project in class, and it's like, my kindergartners are not going to be doing research projects as much as they are learning about 3D shapes and all that stuff.
Now the question is it as important? I mean, because this is what I do for, I mean, the kindergarten. You do a song, and again, because their frame of reference is so limited. Song like Johnny Brown or something like that, and you say, oh well, this is from sort of I believe the Gullah region of the Sea Isles of Georgia. And then you kind of, they have their own culture, and you mention it, and you kind of forget it because there's not enough information.
Yeah, and again, you only have so much time.
And life experience. I mean, you could say the Sea Isles of Georgia, and I don't know. I think you're lucky if 10 of the kids are at least aware of Georgia because somebody happens to live there.
And then you're getting into, do the kids know what states are?
What states are,
and countries. Recently, I taught a unit on Irish Celtic music. And what was nice that the classroom I was in has Apple TV, so I had the district iPad, and I'm like, all right, here's a map of these countries. Here's where they are in relation to us. Here's a short background, and I threw on Riverdance, and the kids were like totally into it, which I was not expecting.
I think everyone likes Irish music.
It's a pretty safe choice if you're going to pick another culture, and in terms of that's very unique character. Like, you could tell the characteristics are different. It's still very easy listening.
Yeah.
As far as skimming the surface, which is all you're doing at this level.
So is it like a jig sort of thing, or no?
I mean, it's Riverdance. They're river dancing.
Okay.
The river dance.
Okay.
So, like, I'm river dancing right now. You can't tell. But I think going back to what you said, is it important at this level? And
I guess what's the importance? Because if you look at the standards,
what's the level of importance?
If you look at the standards, it'll, or at least national standards and things like that, it'll give guidelines of historical background. But what does that mean?
Right.
Like, what should my students be able to say about the historical background of it?
I mean, for me, the bare minimum is to give them an appreciation that the world is bigger than just what they know.
Yeah.
So. In terms of the history of us going back, and then in terms of there's all these other countries too where there's all this other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you run into what's grade level appropriate. Like if you take something like "We Shall Overcome,"
Yeah.
You do that with the 4th and 5th grade, you could probably talk more about what they're learning about the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And same thing with, but if you were to do it with like a 2nd grade, well, range wise, it's a little tough. I mean, I guess you just sort of. I mean, I guess you have to tailor it to what they would know.
Yeah.
But I always feel. I mean, personally, I always feel awkward as a music teacher because, it's sort of these one-off little bits of history, and since I don't know exactly what they're doing, it's difficult for them to make those sort of connections.
Right. You mean what they're doing outside?
Well, what they're doing outside my classroom and in their classroom.
Right.
So, you talk about like, okay, well, what do we know about Martin Luther King? I mean, I ask a lot of questions. I mean, I find the kids end up teaching me more about at least what they know. So what can you tell me about Martin Luther King? And then that usually ends up having a discussion.
I mean, you would have to do that even with teacher collaboration because like you could tell the teacher could tell you, well, they did blah, 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 blah. And then you ask a kid, what did they do? And then they're like,
But I don't think anyone's going to comment that they do an entire, history lesson even for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade.
Yeah. One idea I threw down, which is really going out on a limb, but I've been reading a lot recently in terms of virtual reality progressing, the technology for that being more publicly available. Mm-hmm. I thought it would be cool in, say, like, I guess 20, 30 years when the technology is just like, oh, here's your virtual reality thing for $5. Having kind of like more of a interactive story type of situation, like you put your headset on
and you're
suddenly you're next to young Beethoven. You're hanging out with young Beethoven while you're watching him do his thing.
Oh, well, and this is another thing. Actually, now that you mentioned young Beethoven, not to cut you off.
Yeah.
Classical composers. How much do you teach them?
That's another question.
I mean, some people say it's absolutely 100% so incredibly important for them to understand the classical composers.
Yeah,
the kids tend to like them. I mean, I have that I want to say it's like the Hal Leonard series of them in the background, and all of a sudden you can see the kids are usually pretty interested in the. I'm sure as everyone knows they refer to them as who are the presidents.
Yeah.
Who are those presidents?
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's Brahms.
I mean, that's a question I have too, whereas if I have to pick, do I go for what's traditionally like, oh, you have to teach your classical European composers, or should I go now with people who are more relevant to what they experience?
Or folk music.
Or folk music.
I mean,
Yeah. So.
I mean, I feel you go with what, to me, I mean, I'm more performance driven in my classroom, and
that's obviously very much more common.
I only have, and I mean when I say performance, I mean performance skills. Yeah. Like okay, I'm gonna really attempt when you guys get into 3rd grade, you at least understand the concept of a 5-line staff. you know, in solfege and how it works on, do, re, mi, so, and la.
Yeah.
How do you balance all the time?
So we're especially looking for feedback from music educators, but if you have any ideas, what do you think? What do you do in your classroom? What, maybe if you have kids, what do they do with their music teachers?
Yeah.
Is that effective? Do you think, there's something different that you would rather see them doing? Or is performance focus really what's ideal for the grade level?